Hi everybody, thanks for coming to this session. Very pleased to moderate the panel I'll be interrogating this morning, hopefully with yourselves. We're here to look at the shape of city living in the future, and a key component of that is energy use, and energy, as we're all aware, is becoming increasingly scarce and expensive resource. One that also sits rather uncomfortably on the topic of climate change. So this event's happening while there's a gathering of world leaders in Warsaw to discuss what we can do about reducing carbon emissions and so on. So I think the issue of energy use specifically in terms of developing smart city futures is a very interesting debate today. My name's Michael Kavanagh. I work for the Financial Times. I'm one of a handful of reporters and correspondents looking generally at what I call the traditional energy providers, oil, gas, and so on, but we are also very keen at looking at renewable energy sources. I also look specifically at utilities, be they energy, water providers in the UK, but also with a bit of international perspective. So I'd like to get on and introduce the speakers this morning. What I'm inviting them to do is to talk for about 10 minutes, and then perhaps it should leave about just under half of the hour for general Q&A. I'd love if you could think of some very smart questions for them. First of all, I'd like to introduce Ron Pernick. He is founder and managing director of Clean Edge. He's a consultant and author. He describes himself as a pragmatic, optimist. He's North American. But he's got interesting perspectives, not just on what's happening in the North American market, but internationally, about how particularly renewable and disruptive technologies are changing the shape of how cities operate and how they consume energy. Secondly, I'd like to introduce Alistair Buchanan. He spent several years as head of OFGEM, the UK energy regulator. I think, handles many hot potatoes that are becoming increasingly hotter as the political debate in the UK goes on. I'm hoping he'll talk about marrying the impulses of introducing market forces against really state direction to deliver the very large £1 billion investments that modern infrastructure is demanding in cities. His job has been to square that circle, so I'm hoping he'll give us not just a UK perspective but international perspective on routes to delivering sustainable energy networks in the future. Finally, I'd like to introduce Soto Tolosa. He's the guy that really literally does keep the lights on across Europe. He's very interested in rolling out new lighting technologies, not just in households, but municipalities, in commercial spaces, and obviously from a manufacturer's perspective, very much with obviously a vested interest in changes of energy use. So I'm sure he'll have some interesting perspectives on what cities literally will look like and be lit like in the future. So with no further ado, I'd like to invite Ron up to the podium. Thank you.
Well, hopefully we won't have the technical difficulties of the earlier sessions. Looks like it's good. Can everyone hear me all right? Can you raise your hand if you can hear me? I know we're competing with a lot of rooms here. I usually do about a 45-minute presentation that I culled down to 15 minutes that I'm going to do in 10 minutes. So this is going to be my speed version of my presentation. But what I want to talk about today is sort of the three-legged stool of technology, policy, and capital. I think if we look at energy industry, you have to understand that it's those three levers, those three legs of the stool that are critical. So technology innovation, the technologies that are available for us to use, the policy and policy innovation, whether that's a renewable portfolio standard or whether that's a feed-in tariff or any number of codes and regulations, and then the capital side of the equation. And on capital in the United States, we used to rely primarily on the venture capitalists, but now we're moving in the energy space and clean energy in particular over to the development side, projects being deployed. So today in my talk, and I think with all of us on this panel, we'll probably talk a lot about, well, how do you get stuff deployed? What does it take to do that? The other thing that I want to mention that I think is critical just looking out into the future is standards. We need open standards, we need set standards. If you think about the internet, if you think about HTTP and HTML and all the stuff that enabled the internet, what we're really talking about here is all of the enabling codes and all the enabling standards to allow clean energy to be deployed and integrated. So quickly, I'm going to go over 5 major laws of clean tech. I wrote a book called The Clean Tech Revolution that came out in 2007. Last year, we had another book come out called Clean Tech Nation, and that was really focused on the U.S. marketplace. And we looked at the 5 laws of clean tech. So first of all, clean tech is scaling. If you look at the solar PV and wind industry back in 2000, globally it was a $6.5 billion marketplace. Last year combined, it was a $153 billion marketplace. So we're seeing massive scaling, and anyone who tracks solar PV in particular, you know the cost to install a peak watt of solar PV has gone from $10 to $7 to $3, and now in many cases we're down to $2 a peak watt. So massive scaling that's happening in the sector. I think it's important to remember that. This may be a bit more controversial, but I believe that in the developed world, we do not need new nuclear or coal. And I'm going to say that again, new nuclear or coal. I'm not saying we should abandon nuclear assets. I'm not saying we should abandon coal assets. We should clean up the coal assets. We should ensure the current nuclear assets are safe. But moving forward, I believe we can deploy, in the United States in particular, a combination of natural gas, deep efficiency and energy retrofits, and renewables. It's different in every country. I was just in Japan 2 weeks ago, and as you probably know, there are 50-odd nuclear facilities in Japan, nuclear power plants. They're now currently all offline. There were 2 online earlier this summer. They're all offline right now. Japan will not be able to politically, in any tenable fashion, build new nuclear power facilities. They're not going to bring all of their old nuclear back online. So I think we'll see Japan taking a very much of a leadership role here about how do you do this. But this is one of the other laws. The other is nanotechnology, biotechnology, biomimicry, if you know of that. These technologies that work at a very small level are going to be very critical on the technology piece of this. So membrane technologies, advanced lighting, solar PV breakthroughs are going to require nanotechnology. The other thing, which is good news to everyone in this room, is that this will be a dispersed revolution. This is not happening in one place. I spent 13 years in Silicon Valley, a great place to be, tons of innovation happening, but just look this morning already, whether it's Rio de Janeiro, whether it's Tokyo, whether it's Barcelona, Portland, Oregon, where I'm living now, this is a dispersed revolution. And finally, something I think the venture capitalists forgot about in the early days of investing in the sector is that energy transitions take decades. I like to tell people who are getting MBAs or going to get a graduate or undergraduate degree that they have job security if they're going to work in this sector. This is going to take another 10, 20, 30 years and longer to deploy. So let me now talk about 4 areas very quickly, because I'm looking at the clock here and I know I don't have a lot of time. 4 major areas of innovation that actually have a deep impact on cities. One is the utility of the future. I don't know if you're reading the KPMG reports, if you're reading Clean Edge reports, if you're reading work coming out of WRI and Ceres and a host of others, but the utility is going to be disrupted as we know it. And I'm happy to talk with you about that later afterwards. We are doing work that will come out in Q1 of 2014 that's going to rank the 25 largest U.S. electric utilities on their clean energy activities. It'll be an index, and I'm happy to tell you more about what we're seeing in this space. The electrification of vehicles certainly impacts cities. That was talked about earlier this morning by Kent. I believe that it will mostly be hybrids and all-electric vehicles. The Japanese are pushing fuel cells, so we could see that come to the forefront too, but in my opinion, fuel cells are always a decade away. Deep retrofits, net zero buildings, another key area, and really one that requires a lot of innovation around financing. I think we're going to learn a little bit more about that later. And finally, the other breakthrough area to be tracking is waste to resource. In nature, there is no waste. Everything is a feedstock. So how can we run our cities where waste becomes a feedstock? And as you can see up here, I have the Portland compost buckets, but we compost all of our organic waste. All of our food waste gets composted now. They pick up our garbage, the actual landfill garbage, once every 2 weeks. So a huge shift that's happening. It requires cities to do that. That's happening in San Francisco. It's happening in Seattle and other places. So let me quickly give you a view of the US marketplace. I don't know how many of you know this, but last year, in 2012, so it's 2012 is our 2013 report, renewables account for 49% of all new capacity in the United States. That was actually more than natural gas. And last year, for the first time ever, for total energy use in the country, renewables provided more than nuclear power. That's all energy use. The clean tech activity in the United States is primarily being driven by state activity and metro level activity, not federal. There is leadership at the state level is integrally linked, as you'll see in a second, to the metro level. We have a number of incentives that have worked very well in the United States, but a number of those are expiring in the coming years. So we really have to see the industry get to cost competitiveness with limited subsidies. RPS, Renewable Portfolio Standards, have been targeted to be turned over or rejected at the state level by a number of groups, including ALEC. And none of those initiatives have succeeded in the United States. People want their renewable energy, and they want the state and metro regions to support it. And finally, there is a valley of death issue in the United States right now. It's probably similar in other parts of Europe and throughout Asia, but how companies can survive where there's less money coming from venture capitalists. I'll quickly tell you about a company named Puralytics that just raised $4 million from a band of angels, the Keiretsu Forum. And they're developing a water technology, but increasingly you kind of need to go to the angels and the institutionals because the venture capitalists aren't there with as much capital. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on our state and metro rankings. You can go to our website at Clean Edge. You can download our state and metro report if you want to look at the U.S. marketplace. But something very interesting here, if you look, this is very much a West Coast story and an East Coast story. It's very much a blue state being Democratic and red state being Republican. It's very much of a blue state story right now, although red states do compete. But when you look at integrated policy across technology, regulation, and capital, you can see the type of leadership we're seeing here. And you may notice California and Oregon, and then Washington is just below. It's in the top 10. The metro regions also, we track them on 24 different indicators. The states we track on 70 plus indicators. And we're looking at everything from EV deployment and electricity mix to policies and incentives and capital investments, venture capital, patent activity. And you can see here, again, you can go to our website, but 5 of the top 10 metro regions in the United States are located in California. And 7 of the top 10 are on the West Coast. So what's happening in the U.S. today? A very quick snapshot of some innovative models for financing. One is commercial PACE, property assessed clean energy. This is where you actually can put the expense of deploying the clean energy onto property assessment, like onto a mortgage. And it does not work for residential. There were a number of rules that overturned that, but it works for commercial. There's 30 states right now that have that. There are hundreds of metro regions doing that. State-level green banks are another area where we're seeing a lot of activity in the U.S. right now. Connecticut, New York. They're actually got a $1 billion fund in New York City overseeing investments in clean energy. Metro-level built environment. Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel has a smart infrastructure investment vehicle. And then to those of you who haven't tracked this, renewable portfolio standards have driven a lot of activity in the U.S. California just launched pretty much the equivalent of an energy storage mandate. And it's going to require about 1 gigawatt of energy storage in the coming decade or so. So watch California and watch Japan on that front. And I think that's going to be an interesting area. So my quick sort of models that might sort of change and impact innovation. One is we should deploy renewable electricity and energy storage standards where that's possible. Create and fund smart infrastructure banks. I talked about some of those, but I think there's more we could do there. Leverage proven investment tools. There are now REITs, real estate investment trusts in the United States, investing in clean energy. We could also take things like the MLP, the Master Limited Partnership model, which has billions of dollars that have been invested in natural gas. We could deploy that to renewable energy. I believe we should phase out all energy subsidies in 10 years, starting with fossil fuel subsidies. There are hundreds of billions of dollars going to fossil fuel subsidies today that distort the real economics. Establish and streamline open standards. I talked about that earlier. That's critical. This was mentioned by Kent earlier this morning, but unleash crowdfunding and crowdsourcing. You can do hackathons. You can get MBA students together to develop new models, but use that sort of innovative capacity in your cities. And finally, we're doing a lot of work, as I said earlier, on the utility front, and there are huge opportunities to help the utilities and help the regulators and help the third-party marketers to reinvent the utility of the future. So again, I did that, I think, in 11 and a half minutes, and I'm happy for an open dialogue later. Thank you. Hopefully.
You want to hopster out? Well done.
Okay. Just hitting the play button, is that right?
Yep. Just go here.
Yeah, we're there. Good.
He's biting into you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. As you can see, I'm going to talk about regulation and smart cities, something that you might not necessarily think that they sit with each other. This first page is a statement of the obvious, other than what's in the red, which is, and maybe you don't hear this very often or even want to think it, regulators can actually help this very key area in terms of developing smart cities. Now, why was I invited along? I think it was mainly because, as Michael said, I've been the UK sort of chief regulator, for want of a better word, for the last 10 years. My tenure came up in the early part of this year. And during that time, we totally rewrote the UK methodology for running network companies. And in doing that, we made sure that we accommodated in quite a significant way smart cities. And therefore, at my new role at KPMG, one of my tasks is firstly to help both UK and overseas players understand and take advantage of the opportunities, and here's the key, financial opportunities. And the second is to explain to overseas cities, regulators, and others whether the approach that we've adopted in Great Britain is useful either totally or in part to their needs. And if you want to follow any of this up, then my details are on the front page of this pack. So let's have a look at what we did. Rather ironically, given our first speaker today was from RIIO, we created a new model that we called the RIIO model. And the key was that we needed to replace a previously fantastically successful regulatory model called RPI-X. And we used that in the UK for 20 years, and basically it's just like squeezing a lemon. You just keep squeezing the companies. You may increase your prices by RPI minus a figure. The problem is there was no R&D in the sector for at least 20 years. You're hard pushed to find an engineer. Most of them were run like people like me, accountants. So we realized that we needed to regain the initiative on R&D, mainly because the government was driving through a sustainable development agenda. And the I in the eye of RIIO are absolutely critical to the new price control. Companies will be rewarded quite handsomely if they succeed on sustainable development incentives and innovation. And in particular, we introduced a fund called the Low Carbon Network Fund that took consumers' money and gave it to the companies. Now, they had to compete for it, but it gave it to the local electricity distribution network companies in the first instance, which you're seeing on this page, but we've now rolled that out to both transmission companies and also to local gas distribution companies. There are other ways also that we've provided monies into the sector so that we can really develop innovation in smart metering. So as I've said, there's a range of things a regulator can do. Point one here is really looking at the price signals, price controls, but we can help technical standards, we can get rid of bureaucracy, and we can provide and be a centre for trusted data and information. Very important. Now, to give you some evidence, the transmission companies were the first through the new price control called RIIO. Now, I'm not going to take you through this page. It's the first three issues that I just want to pull together. Because in Great Britain, we provide ex-ante, that's upfront regulatory money, so the company knows what it can spend. Unlike many other jurisdictions where you spend the money and you sit there wondering how much you're going to get back from the regulator, it's upfront. You're also inflation protected, and we've moved to a longer price cycle, 8 years, not 5. That, I think, is very good news for entrepreneurs and innovators and the providers of capital, because they can work with the companies to develop smart city ideas over a much further time frame than previously we allowed for. So the new model is live. But let's be frank, transmission companies, their interface into smart cities isn't that dramatic. It's on distribution that matters. And we're currently, or I was currently, my colleagues now, are doing the price control for the electricity distribution companies. And the funding is slanted towards the low voltage end of the market in Great Britain. Now, I mentioned earlier that there are 4 ways to get the funding. The first is through the Low Carbon Network Fund, £64 million a year now, up to £90 million in 2 years' time. Anybody can have access. So if you're from a European university or you're from a European startup fund looking at electric vehicles, low voltage dimensions, this fund is available. It is not just to the local utility. And as you can see, we've already awarded £120 million in the first 2 years, 45 million in year 3, and not all projects are successful. You have to go through an application process. So that's the first pool of money that you can get. The second pool is that you make your own strategic claim. I'd love to talk about this a bit more because the Scottish Islands have been fantastic at developing their own strategic claim. And although we're talking an awful lot about smart cities, I actually think smart islands have got an advantage over smart cities, and they are setting the pace for some of the most innovative work in Great Britain at the moment. The third area, which we've always been hesitant about, is called anticipatory investment. If you can prove well enough that you need money ahead of ahead of the development more generally, then the regulator will now for the first time be willing to consider that. And finally, very small projects will find their way into the price control without needing separate funding. So the proof of the cake always is in the eating. Do we have a cake? Yes, we do. I've given you 3 examples here. And I've tried to give you 3 examples that show that it ranges from small cities like Durham, an ancient city, through to mega cities like London and a modern large industrial city like Bristol. The point of this slide, and I mentioned it earlier to you, is the range of parties involved in each of the projects. But I've put in red the local power company and their parents. You can't get much bigger than Berkshire Hathaway or CKI out of Hong Kong, and they are seriously involved in some of the key projects in Great Britain. Let's take Durham, which is the leader. It won the first amount of money, a large amount of money. What Durham's trying to do is link smart tech with smart networks with local microgen. And it's often underway, and they will have to deliver their results to us by next year. And a key element of the funding is that you have to share your findings with everybody else. In other words, you're being given consumers' money, and therefore the consumer and the generality will get the results. But that doesn't mean that you haven't got a huge head start in taking that innovation or that product to other jurisdictions or actually developing them within Great Britain. Bristol and London, candidly, the money that they're getting out of regulation is small beer compared to the larger projects that both London and Bristol are following. But nevertheless, energy is a key element within this. And, for example, Mayor Boris Johnson has been very involved in the price control development that OFGEM have put through. Now, this is really very important, and I'd be interested to share after the session your views on the findings that you've got. There are some difficult findings on this page and some positive findings. Now, the positive are point 2 and point 5. Point 2 is we're attracting entrepreneurs. We're seeing small companies like Smart Grid Solutions in Glasgow, which is developed out of a university hub, Strathclyde, and a company and Scottish investor hub. And it's really exciting seeing these small companies gather steam. We're also seeing that, as I mentioned earlier, islands rather than cities are thoroughly taking advantage of these innovations. Some of the other messages are more difficult. Customers are slightly reluctant. What's in it for them? Their bill's going up. How do you engage with me? And engagement with consumer is turning out to be possibly the most critical issue. The rollout of electric vehicles, heat pumps, you name it, much, much slower in Britain than we had planned or had expected. Data is also a problem. I listened with great interest to the Deputy Mayor of RIIO, where he talked about data access. Data privacy in Britain is a massive issue, and getting across barriers of data privacy is one of the things that drags back a number of the projects. And for those of you who are economists in the room, locational pricing gets somewhat perverted when you start to move into this kind of area where you're promoting smart cities and the government at the same time wants to promote wind farms in the North Sea. Who gets preference? So the RIIO model, I think, looks very relevant and useful to smart cities. If we look at the eye in the eye of RIIO, it's direct funding and direct incentive. A utility company can introduce its return on equity by up to 2 or 3%. Cities benefit from the investment, entrepreneurs and investors can engage. What about the consumers and the politicians? They get comfort from the O in RIIO because the O are the outputs and the outcomes that the companies have to deliver, which will get published. So City Hall and consumers get comfort that the companies are not slacking off and are giving value for money. So in total, I think what we're seeing here is regulators working within the grain of the broad political direction, both EU and London, to enable companies to develop what in many instances are long-term projects. And that, I think, aligns quite neatly with the long-term nature of regulated networks. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much. I think it's very interesting to be at the end of these two very interesting speeches, since let's see how lighting manages in this, navigates in this landscape. Over the last 10 years, I've been witnessing this transition from conventional lighting to LED, and also the evolution of remote light management systems, as well as software platforms, and how that has impacted the lighting industry. We call this connected lighting, and I'm convinced that we will not be able to make this a reality until we work all together with cities, service providers, and we have really a fundamental understanding of what's going on. We've heard the word holistic before, and we will probably hear it in my slides, because that's actually what we need to do to make that a reality, especially if we want to help cities to face the challenges they will be facing. You wouldn't be here if you wouldn't know these challenges, and it's about sustainability, technological revolution, we've heard about it, the economic uncertainty, the growing urbanization of cities. Cities are becoming really very important, and a lot of people is moving to them. And of course, the new business models. We see business models, new business models in all different types of industries, and I'm convinced that we will also see new business models in the lighting industry. Another one which is also very important, because not everything is about energy saving or payback time, is how cities will be able to differentiate within or among the other cities, how they will do their branding. To be able to do that, we have something we call the intelligent city approach, because we know that there are ways to deal with this, and actually that's also what I'm going to show you with an example. The intelligent city is a holistic approach, as I said before, where we partner with municipalities and service providers in order to have a good understanding of what they need for their city. We know that not all the cities are the same, We know that some of them, they focus on tourism, and some others on the industrial, let's say, assets, and some others in other aspects that they want to promote of their city. But they all want to attract either businesses, tourists, or citizens. So we have to work with proof technologies so that they can do something today which will be usable in the future. What a municipality wants, very clear, to become a green city, a sustainable city, which is safe and that can attract citizens, but also can differentiate from other cities. What the lighting operators want, basically to be very efficient with the way they manage the asset, be effective, have a simple system that they can use to manage the lighting assets, but also to make sure that the energy that they are consuming and the energy that they have promised to be consumed by the city is there and will not change. Well, we've seen a trend, a clear trend with that, moving from a moment in which the municipality was really, let's say, owning all the risk of managing the assets, in particular the lighting asset. Later, in some countries, we saw utilities taking over, and of course, service providers taking over. At this moment, we see already the situation in which the service provider is taking the full risk. And that's very interesting, because then they base their activities on the energy performance contracting, and in some cases even in the outcome-based contracting. The lighting asset is extremely interesting for that, because in this one, the energy operator takes the full risk of the investment, and of course he gets the payback by using the savings of the investment. And after that, the city, the municipality can take the decision whether to continue with this contract, to change the contract, look at the outcomes, look at the performance, and take a decision based on that. But what's important is that they have an asset which is future-proof and that has been proving to save the energy that was committed. The consequence is very simple. The city, instead of focusing on all different activities like the maintenance of the assets, the energy consultancy, talking to the electricity suppliers, and so on, they can really focus on their core activities and let all these other activities be managed by the service provider or the city operator. If we look a little bit more into the detail of this graph, we see that it's not only about energy saving, but also about being more efficient in managing the installation, in managing the asset. And that's why only a connected lighting can help in that, to enable the service providers to guarantee those outcomes, because that's key to have a profitable contract and a win-win for the city and for the service provider. So I would like to show you an example of what I'm talking about. And I will take one city here in Spain, which is called Palencia. And this is a very interesting project, because it's a 12 years long project in which the service company, the energy performance contracting company, or the ESE, it's called for Empresa de Servicios Energéticos, will promise 75 up to between 70 and 75 energy savings. Of course, the promise is also on the light quality. It's very easy to promise energy savings, but then not having the right light quality, or having the right light quality in the beginning, but after 2 or 3 years, some strange things start happening. For that, it's very, very, very important that we do a master plan, that we understand what the city really needs and where they want to focus the improvements. It's only energy saving, it's about livability, it's about enhancing some areas of the city, whatever. In this case, it was very important to manage the light quality, the color rendering of the light, the amount of light, the light levels, the uniformity of the light, a lot of different topics related to lighting. Also very important, and that was also important not just for the city but for the energy service company, is that they need to manage that. They need to know exactly what is happening, because they have promised certain outcomes in this contract. And for that, they needed a remote light management system, which by carefully analyzing the requirements of the city and really tuning exactly where to focus the efforts, we even managed in this case to go for a full light point management system, while in many other ESCOs we go for cabinet-based solutions. In this one, and by using this type of systems, we know exactly what is going on in the city, what is the status of the light points, where are failing, where are not, what are the dimming levels, and therefore the energy service company can take their decisions. Of course, they see the energy consumption per area, per street, even if there are 2 or 3 different, let's say, utility or electricity suppliers, do that also per electricity supplier, which is also very important. And very important also to be able to fine-tune the energy savings, because it can be that some assumptions were made in the beginning that are later on probably not exactly like that. So you always need to be able to tune that and to, of course, get to an agreement with the city to do the tuning and get the savings that you promised. Something that I would like to mention in order to conclude is that we've seen, and probably we'll be talking about paybacks and return of the investment, but we see also a lot of cities looking at different ways to get the return of the investment. This one, for example, is Valladolid, where, of course, they focus very much on the light levels and the quality of the light, but also on using lighting for a different purpose. Using lighting to enhance the historic center of the city, to attract visitors during the night, and to get revenues, in this case, for example, by the increasing amount of night hotel nights, which was around 20% more people was sleeping in the city just to enjoy that event. And it's still happening. Connected lighting, it's also about connecting with our smartphones, for example. And in this case, you can even sometimes, it's allowed to change some of the lighting scenes that they use in the city. We could also even think about experiencing the city in a different way. The city during the day, it's usually experienced always in the same way, but we can really shape the city in different ways during the night, and therefore make people experience that city in complete different shapes. And we can connect that to even, of course, our smartphones, make it interactive so that people can change scenes, for example, for a period of time, or play a business model together with the advertisement in the city and connect that to the lighting. There are several different options. We are, of course, those are more conceptual, some of them. We are working on some of them in some cities, but there are definitely many ways to make lighting a new business model also for the cities. Just to conclude, I would like to summarize that Intelligent City is about making the city resource efficient, very important, to make it safe and secure so that people really want to live in that city, and attractive. It's also very important. It's not just about energy saving, but making the city really attractive and future-proof so that people really enjoy living there. At the end, what we all want to do is to achieve the goal of feeling proud of our city. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank all. I guess if we can just make sure we got some level on our mics, but we'll try and speak up anyway. I'd like to thank the speakers. I'm just going to make some very quick remarks on what I think I've heard and some themes I'd like to perhaps see discussed. But I'd really love it. I think we've got about a quarter of an hour, so I'd love, to be honest, that the Q&A can be led by the floor. But I think it's interesting with Ron. We've seen this morning very much a renewable enthusiast calling for an end to energy subsidies for all forms of energy generation, which is very interesting in terms of what we're going to see as the future energy mix going forward. Alistair, a regulator, insisting that the regulators are the good guys. Some interesting remarks there about how the necessary directions of watchdogs can actually potentially lead to some financial opportunities for people willing to come in and invest. And I think the remarks made about creating funds that are open, not just to the big players themselves, but for people coming in was very interesting to hear. Jill, very interesting. Energy saving, lighting, you think it's an easy hit. It's one of the perhaps the low-hanging fruits of where we can very quickly save energy. It's an important, obviously visible component of how we consume energy. It's not just about saving money, but improving qualities of lives. I would like to, perhaps myself, to put it to you guys to answer. I thought it interesting also Alistair's remarks about perhaps cities aren't necessarily the places to look for innovations, that remoter areas can perhaps be easier to install, and perhaps that's where we might find more rigour in changing the landscape of our living. I'd be interested to hear what other people say about that. I think, Ron, we had a quick talk about whether it is cities or villages that are really going to be show us the pathway to the future. As a cover reporter on utilities, I have heard watchdogs themselves talk about the dangers of companies providing big infrastructure projects, sort of wanting to deliver big boys' toys because actually they're incentivized to do that. You talk about squeezing lemons. I'm just wondering whether we can develop that. I think if you are in a household where your incomes are going down and there's not much prospect for growth in the next decade, what is the argument, if it ain't broke, you don't have to fix it and even improve it? So I think you mentioned the issue of selling these projects to the consumer. Yeah. So those are some of my thoughts. I'm just wondering if perhaps we do have any questions immediately from the floor. If you could raise your hand and perhaps introduce yourself, and we'll take questions. Yes, please. There is a...
With the city-based reforms that led to the lighting solution rollout and also the regulatory reforms for the utilities, how much of that was caused by higher level policy objectives linked to climate change emissions reduction, for instance?
Good question.
Perhaps one...
I'm happy to start on that one. A regulator ultimately is certainly in Europe, an independent regulator is created by both the third directive and statute within the individual country. So ultimately both Brussels and London, in my case, are setting the high-level agenda. And in fact, the British government's decided, and I think it's a good idea, to rather than do it implicitly, they're explicitly in future going to create an energy policy statement within which all the players underneath that statement know what the general vision and direction of the government is. So yes, there's no question that when OFGEM was given a sustainable development duty, a legal duty to deliver on it, we had to change the way that we were doing price controls. We would have changed it anyway, incidentally, because a lot of the kit that had been put in, wires, pipes, after the Second World War was falling apart. So it needed rebuilding, and the old price control was inadequate to deal with that.
And I think the question was specifically about lighting.
So similarly with the cities, is it backed up by overarching policy around city-level objectives that lends itself into the service contract for the lighting and emissions reduction, for instance?
Well, what you see, it's that it differs from country to country. I mean, the fact that this massive transformation from conventional lighting to LED allows for really huge energy savings, that means that you have to do something, because you know that by just changing technology, we're going to get 50% energy saving. So let's say not doing anything, it's probably not an option. On the other hand, what you see, for example, in Spain, is that there are also not many other options to do that transformation. So you've got to do it through an energy service company, because you need financing to do that, and the municipalities cannot afford anymore these huge investments by themselves. So on one hand, you see the benefit, the huge benefit. On the other hand, you cannot do it alone. So the combination of both, clearly in Spain, it forces the success. Of course, in the beginning, it's always a little bit shaky, because municipalities are not used to do that. They used to manage everything. And some of them, they did it pretty well. But I think in the future, it will slowly change. And then what's important is that the municipality makes clear what he wants and the outcomes. And if that is clear, the results should be really beneficial for the city and for the citizens.
I would just add, in the United States, it's not surprisingly less climate-driven and driven by, right now, resilience and future-proofing and energy savings. That's what's driving all the activity in the U.S. You know, if you look at New York, you look at Chicago, you look at those cities that are deploying funds and helping to do that. NYSEG does it in New York. It's around resilience efforts and energy savings. And I think this energy service model is critical. I mean, again, if you look at the U.S. today, the big innovation that I didn't get to spend a lot of time in my talk on is what's happening with SolarCity and Sunrun and Sungevity. These companies that are saying, look, companies don't want to own the asset. They just want the benefit of the asset. So they come in, they put the solar on the rooftop, they have every incentive in the world to do it as inexpensively as possible, and they sell the energy saving back to the, and in this case, the actual energy to the end user. And I think we're going to see the same model innovated around energy storage, and of course, for years, we've seen it in building efficiency. And this real quick, one iconic image there is the Empire State Building in the United States, which used an energy service type model to fund its deep retrofit.
Any other questions, please? If we could get the...
Hello. My question is, I guess that for three of the speakers, in implementing these projects in a partnership with the city managers or city mayors, that, in your experience, does the size of the city matters? Because I've heard of samples of, in the Spanish case, of two cities which are quite small in terms of mean average of size of population. Are there other examples with bigger cities, in larger cities, in which I imagine obstacles, fragmentation of different departments in the city, etc., put some obstacles? And I'm very interested in the comparison between London and Bristol, because it's two very different sizes, and maybe they give us different examples of potential obstacles or feasibility or unfeasibility of launching these projects. Thank you.
Okay, I will start. I think it matters for various reasons, and I could mention a couple of them. One is very simple. The bigger the city, the more complex is to find out what they really want. And also the heritage assets, what's already working and running in the city, it's also a bigger thing to manage. So the transformation there, it's lower. I mean, Palencia is something that you can replace all the light points there pretty easy. If you want to do that in Barcelona, it's not going to be very easy, because there are many, and also using different type of technologies, and not just lighting, but also fountains or whatever technology or asset that you want to manage in the city. On the other hand, what we also see is sometimes, for example, using European funds. Of course, the bigger the city, it helps also, because, you know, in this case, banks want to deal with big amounts of money rather than small. So then you need to find different ways of funding, different ways of even different type of service companies, more specialized in small, medium-sized cities or then big cities. So taking a decision in a big city is always more difficult.
I might make just a quick remark. I live in London, and where the responsibility is very much council by council. There are several, perhaps 20 or more local councils within London. My experience is my local council has just put in new street lighting where I live. It is dark now because it's the winter, and obviously I think that they do get contractors that can come back, that can actually help come to financing deals with local councils to put these new lighting systems in. And I think it's very interesting you talking not just about the cost savings, but the aesthetics, because we used to have horrible orange halogen glow in the street, and if you're living with it most of the evening as you're walking along, very unpleasant. And now it's nice, bright, sort of slightly warm light. So again, I think there are aesthetic improvements, and I think as long as councils, there are systems whereby contractors can go and actually help part fund. I think is often what's happening, that local councils can actually move quite quickly if they're so minded.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Any more, Mark?
I'm going to give
Please.
you three quick comments from the Durham, Bristol, London examples I gave you. I mean, I picked them because you went from small, medium to mega. I think the results of Durham's project, and what's interesting is, I don't know if anybody knows Durham, beautiful city in the north of England. It's totally an island by the river that goes around it. It's very interesting. So it comes back to my island comment. I think the impact of the project on Durham could be far more influential on the people who live there than currently the impact of the monies on a megacity like London. So that would be my first comment. All the other parts to the equation, water, waste, transport, etc., will take a bigger impact, I think, on London. Secondly, in Britain, there is a very strong respect to independent regulation. So whether it's from the government offices or City Hall, the regulator will have to do their job without influence. And generally, I'd have to say, having served for 10 years, everybody respects that within the network part of regulation in Britain. The third bit would be, and this is where City Hall really does help the regulator, and I think you're going to see on Friday when we have the initial findings from the regulator on the local distribution companies' price controls. So London Electricity will have a very important announcement on it this Friday. I don't know what it is. But look out in particular for anticipatory investment in London, because London have made no secret of the fact that they think they're different with the big financial centres there, and that they need some special treatment within the price control, within the broad smart city context. And so I will be very interested to look at my ex-colleagues to see what they do on Friday. But this has been a feature of the debate, and without doubt, City Hall in London has helped this debate get a focus.
We are starting to run out of time. I'm just, if there are any other questions from the floor, please raise your hand. If we are waiting, I'm just wondering whether I could ask the panel whether there's anything in each other's presentations that may have sparked some thoughts, some ripostes. So perhaps I could ask you in turn to
I have a
come back
question
on.
for Alistair. So I'm very interested in the RIIO model, and I was trying to understand in the investments that they're being made, how much is in like an equity investment? Are there equity investments going on? And are you taking on a technology risk? And how much is in project deployment investments? And I'll tell you why I asked when you answered.
No, I totally agree. Yeah, there are two rules associated with that. 10% of the investment must come from the players themselves. Could be more, but it's a minimum of 10%. That's your entry fee. And we've recognized that basically because for 25 years in Britain, there was no incentive for research and development, no incentive for innovation at all in the network part of the electricity chain, that we have to take consumer money, and a lot of these projects won't work.
Right.
And there is an understanding that they won't. But what we have is a panel of experts, and if you have a project, you have to take your project to the panel of experts. And for example, in the last round of the 7 projects that sought money, only 5 got it. So there is a form of control, and then a few years later you go back to that panel with your results.
And are you getting a piece of the company, or are you investing in the project?
You as the company are investing,
I'm
that's your project.
But I'm getting money from you guys.
Yes, you are.
Yeah. For the project deployment.
So the consumer gives you the money. You don't have to give the British consumer the money back.
Gotcha. So in the U.S., the reason I asked is equity investments right now are sort of verboten. So that was the whole thing with like Solyndra. So the movement in the U.S. is not to invest in technology companies and get an equity stake as a public entity, a government investing in that, but to invest in projects. Sounds like it's a little bit of both, but you're enabling early stage projects to get into the pipeline, it sounds like.
Yeah.
From my side, my last comment I would say regarding this is that regulations are really necessary. I mean, I see cities changing the way they are contracting services, and they are not used to that. So either they have a framework in which they can move and be safe, either they will not do it if that's not there. So that's why it's so important, and what I see also, and we've seen it in the UK, but also in other countries, step by step, the framework is there so that cities can take the chance to move forward. Otherwise, they will keep contracting things in the same way they've done the last 30 years.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to first of all follow up the question about the index, because the index is it's going to be an incredibly powerful tool. The question that I'm interested in is, with that tool, will either the federal regulators or the state regulators turn to their utility companies and say, you're at the bottom of the pile, what are you going to do? Or to the cities and say, you know, city mayors, you're a shambles, what are you going to do?
Yeah, so right now we have the metro indexes and the state indexes, and those definitely are used by NGOs and by policymakers and regulators to understand what can move the needle. So if a city or a state is serious about moving up, they can look at what's working in the states that have been sort of innovating and pull the levers. We don't know yet what the utility index will cause, but I'll tell you, right now we're very privileged at Clean Edge. We've been sitting in stakeholder engagement meetings with large corporates, the Walmarts of the world, the IKEAs of the world, the Facebooks of the world, who are saying, look, we need to innovate, we need renewable energy, and we're going to buy it from somebody. So can the utility participate in that or not? And I think this type of index is going to provide a transparency that we don't have today. Because right now it's so monopolized, as you know, it's a regulated monopoly in the US, it's regulated in many places in a monopoly, and we need more transparency. So I hope we get to see that, and I hope we can talk about it more. So.
Okay.
So can I ask a question on lighting?
Yes, please.
We had a figure of 70%, to which my jaw dropped, and I want you to come and do it to my city, where I live, because 70% saving is staggering. What's your average that you can do?
Well, that very much depends on the mix, the product mix that you are, let's say, deploying in the city. And that depends, of course, on what the city wants to achieve. If the city wants to achieve in light quality, or more into savings, or more into livability of the city, and then you choose. Right. The average, I would say 50%, it's easy.
Wow.
And I know you didn't want to talk about just payback, but on average, where are we in that?
No, I think at this moment around 5 years, between 7 and 5 years, no problem.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Good.
Okay. I'm sort of getting red signals from our time prompt here. We were asked to finish at 1:30 local time. I think, given we've taken some questions from the floor and some follow-up discussion on the panel. So I'd like to thank Ron, Alistair, and Jill for their contributions today. This is the first of several sessions that are very much energy focused within the Smart City Expo. So I would commend you to attend further events later today and in the week. And I think as many questions have been raised and answered, but presumably some of these themes may well be rehearsed in more detail at some of the other sessions. So hopefully you'll get benefit from that. So if I can just thank the speakers again, and thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you.